Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar about how to make a good COF application. It's being delivered by Plunkett UK today, one of the fund's official support partners. In the last half hour of the webinar, we'll be hearing from Carol Davis, who is secretary of a successful COF grantee group, a pub group. So you'll have the chance to ask her questions as well as us. And if we can go on to the next slide, David. Thank you. This is the agenda and aims for the webinar today. Just a quick few bullet points. The Community Ownership Fund and the support programme, how to apply and the assessment criteria, which is really important. The overview of the strategic case and the management case, which are two different parts of the application. And putting together a successful application in practice. As I said, we're going to be hearing from a successful COF grantee group later on. Next slide. So to support the Community Ownership Fund, the government has brought on board a coalition of 10 different support partners to help people in different ways who are interested in applying. Plunkett UK is one of them. You see us there, and you can see the logos of all the others. And so between us, we cover the whole UK, but we also have different sets of specialisms and different sets of knowledge and experience of working with a whole range of different organisations and on different assets as well. So between us, we're kind of covering all bases. And there's a lot of collective experience and expertise there. Next slide. So a bit about us at Plunkett. Plunkett UK, we're a charity and we specialise mainly actually working with rural communities, but we do have quite a bit of work going on in urban communities as well these days. We support groups to set up community-owned businesses in the main, and that can be literally anything. We're probably best known for shops and pubs and cafes, but there's all sorts of different things like farms, woodlands, microbreweries, bakeries, allotments, all sorts of things. And as I say, we've got a strong track record in pubs and retail, local food, and we like the sorts of models that are wide democratically owned business models. And you can see there our social media handles and our phone number if you want to get in touch with us. We're very friendly, give us a call. Okay, next slide. So as I said, that coalition of 10 organisations that we're part of, it works in different ways. We do different things. One of the first things that we do is that we respond to the need for more information through things like this webinar. So the thing that you are on today is part of the support that we offer. We also work as part of a team from different organisations, all answering inquiries that people might send through the My Community site. So if you type an inquiry into the My Community form on the website, it will get triaged out to somebody at one of those organisations, and Plunkett is one of them, so you might get a reply from us. And the other bit of the support that we provide is to prioritised groups. We are sometimes able to offer in-depth support packages to help them with their application and putting in a good quality application at the end of that process. So that's in a nutshell what we're all doing. So I think the next slide, I'm going to hand over to my fantastic colleague, David Miskin, who is here, a very, very experienced community business advisor. He's been working with Plunkett for many years and very experienced in helping groups apply to the COF as well. So welcome, David. I'm going to hand over to you. So let's get stuck in and learn about the detail of how you put in a strong COF application.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Diane. Yeah, we appreciate this probably isn't the most exciting subject, but if it means you can get lots of money from the government for your project, then it's worth having a listen for the next sort of hour and a half or so. So what is the Community Ownership Fund? Some of you will know this already, some will be brand new to this, but it's a £150 million fund. It covers the whole of the UK, so that's England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and it's funds available for groups to take control of amenities or facilities that are at risk of loss without community intervention. So the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities define a risk as being risk from closure, a risk of being sold, a risk of neglect and dereliction under current ownership, a risk of energy inefficiency that threatens long-term sustainable operations. It's a bit of a mouthful. This is something they introduced in round 3. We're about to go into round 4, so this is a fairly new risk that they've identified. And finally, a risk of being an unsustainable current business model. So if you're unsure, I just wanted to give a couple of examples. So I'm working at the moment with a group that run a village hall. Now, the village hall is over 100 years old. It's really not fit for purpose. And it's costing them lots of money to maintain and make good the facility. So that's costing them lots of money. And B, it's no longer suitable because the floor is collapsing and only a small part of it is able to be used. It's not really fit for purpose. So there aren't many local groups that actually can use it. And so A, they're limited in their income they can achieve, and B, it's costing them lots of money. So it isn't really a sustainable business model. So that's the bottom one. But it's also under threat and risk of neglect and dereliction. So it's not just that something is going to close or it's going to be sold. There are other risks that are involved. So the Community Ownership Fund, a lovely picture of Michael Gove there, not someone that's shy of publicity. I've noticed it in the papers again today. So Michael Gove is the Minister with responsibility for the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. It's a bit of a mouthful. So when he launched this Community Ownership Fund in 2021, he said the £150 million Community Ownership Fund aims to ensure that local people across the UK can support and continue to benefit from treasured local institutions whose futures may be in doubt, whether it's the pub on the high street that's facing a closure, a village shop, or a local sports team that might lose its ground. The fund offers a great opportunity for local groups to take them over and to run them as businesses by the community for the community. And I think that's quite a nice little summary of what the Community Ownership Fund is all about. Just in terms of where we are with the fund, it's a bit confusing. Diane and I were talking about this before we went live, but the scheme has been run in a series of rounds, and we've finished round 3 and we're about to go into round 4. But within each round there are also windows, so it can get a bit confusing. But in terms of the money that's been spent, so we know there was £150 million in the pot to start with. The government have spent, I think they've spent £74 million so far, has been granted, although I noticed that the latest prospectus says 71.4 million, but it's somewhere in that region. So roughly half of the money has already been dispersed of that 150 million. There's an announcement due, I'm looking at Diane who's nodding, but we think sometime probably in the next month or so, in terms of the last round, which closed, the window closed on the 31st of January. So a big chunk of that money will go then. So we're well over halfway in terms of what's gone so far. The government website says 257 groups have benefited from grants so far, although I make it 267, so I'm not quite sure who's right there. The majority of those in England, 178 in England, 45 in Scotland, 20 in Wales and 24 in Northern Ireland. in terms of types of legal structures who have benefited from COF grants, the biggest number are charities. And the vast majority of those charities are companies limited by guarantee, or some of those are CIOs, charitable incorporated organisations. The second largest group are community benefit societies. The third largest are community interest companies. And in round 3, the government extended the organisations that could apply for the COF grants to parish, town and community councils. And there are now 18 of those which have benefited from COF grants. 8 of those were in the last round, and we're expecting more in the next announcement. In terms of types of assets, Diane said that Plunkett look after all sorts of community businesses. The biggest number are pubs. So of those 267, 30 so far have been pubs. And we know at Plunkett that community ownership of pubs is a growing area. There were lots of community hubs, lots of community shops have received grants. There was one woodland trust. There were some public toilets. There was a weightlifting centre, believe it or not, in Dartford in Kent, and also an old bus. An old bus was done up at the Withall Transport Museum, and they received a small grant of 57,000. But the average grant has been roughly a bit over 250,000, and we'll talk a bit in a moment about some of the changes. But in the last round, there were a couple of grants over 2 million. So that's kind of roughly where we are in terms of the programme to date. Sorry, there's Michael Gove. Sorry, I thought the picture was up, but there he is. If anyone was missing his picture. Okay, so as I've just said, the next round to launch will be round 4. We're expecting the window to open in round 4. I think we did think it was going to be mid-March. Again, I'm looking at Diane, but we're now thinking late March. So that the window to open in late March, this is for full applications, and to close probably early May, do we think? Again,
yeah, that's the latest that we've heard, but there's no confirmed dates.
No. Those people, and we'll talk a little bit about the process in a moment, or I will, but those that have passed the expression of interest stage should get an email notifying them of the window opening 2 weeks before that window actually opens. And typically the windows have been open for around about 6 weeks. And it doesn't matter whether you apply on the first day of the window being open or the last day. That should make no difference to your success or otherwise. So yes, round 4 opening the end of this month. So there's up to you can make an application for up to £2 million of capital funding to purchase or lease an asset, or to pay for extensions or renovations. Although the guidance in the prospectus, and the prospectus for round 4 has just been published, and we do include the link to that in this set of slides, states that DLUC, that's the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Community, that I'm going to call DLUC for the rest of this webinar, expects most applications to be around about 250,000. That's just an expectation. So in the last round of successful applicants, there were probably of I think 45, there were 7 or 8 where the capital grant was more than 250,000, to give some idea. A key element of COF funding is there has to be evidence of match funding. And for groups to actually get the money, that match funding needs to be in place. And the match funding needs to be a minimum of 20% of the total capital requirement. So just to give you some idea, or to put that in numbers, if the total capital requirement for your scheme is 250,000, then you can apply to COF for 200,000, and therefore you have 50,000, i.e. 20% of the total requirement as your own match funding. And when we talk about match funding, this is money that you raise yourself. So this could be other grants. It could be, if you're a community benefit society, this could be capital from a community share issue. It could be donations. It's any money that you can raise yourself to match the COF grant. You can also apply for revenue funding of up to 20% of your capital ask, so what you're applying for from COF in terms of capital funding, up to a maximum of 50,000. And DLUC are very keen that groups do apply for that revenue funding. And the revenue funding could cover all sorts of things, but it's designed really to support your business, particularly in the first year. So for instance, it might pay towards your salary costs or wage costs for the first year. If you've got a complex renovation or build project, it maybe would pay for a project manager. It's that sort of thing that that COF expect you to apply for. There were a number of changes in the last round which still apply to round 4, the next round. So the increase to the total capital ask went up from 1 million to 2 million. The introduction of parish, town and community councils being eligible to apply was a change from round 3. The number of bidding windows increased, although they've today in the release of the prospectus for round 4, the government has stated that this will be the last round, but not necessarily the last window. So we do anticipate there being a second window in round 4 later this year, but in terms of the timing, that's very much dependent on the timing of the general election. So there are kind of no guarantees. So the message that we're getting, and again, I'm looking at George and Diane here, is that, you know, if you want this money, apply as soon as you can. If you can get your act together to apply in round 4, window 1, opening later in March, then go for that. But we still hope there will be another window later in the year. The other big change in round 3, which still applied to round 4, is that there's improved guidance and support through locality and then the 9 other providers, which include Plunkett. So there's lots of information on the My Community website, which is locality's website. And as Diane has already said, some groups that pass the expression of interest stage will be allocated in-depth support from the 10 providers, which include Plunkett UK. But that will only be those groups that are deemed to be of greatest need. And now we don't get involved in deciding who those groups are that have the greatest need. That's down to DLUC, but those criteria we know include things like the multiple indices of deprivation, ethnicity data, and the community needs index. So yeah, that's kind of roughly what the scheme looks like at the moment. So how do you get on board? How do you get in with a chance of getting some of this money? Some of you on the webinar may already have been through this stage, but the first point of call really for making an application is what's called the expression of interest stage, or EOI. Now this has changed recently. The window for EOI applications was closed for a period of time while the government introduced a new system, which was slightly frustrating and confusing, but it did mean that all those groups that had previously made an expression of interest application but hadn't received a grant had to reapply on the new system. And that window is still open. It opened on the 6th of March. It's now fully automated. Now, I've had feedback from a few groups. The government has said it takes only 20 to 30 minutes to make the application, and that does appear to be the case, as long as you have all your information prepared beforehand. And you will get a response almost immediately as it's automated to say either yes, you're fine, you can go ahead and make a full application. If that's the case, sometimes that you will get what's called an outcome. It's an email, so you get an outcome email, and it may highlight some risks to your full application, or it may just say, no, you're fine. But in either case, you will have a unique reference code, which you will require to input in your full application. And 2 weeks before the window opens, you'll receive an email with a link to the full application form. It's an online form. If you do receive an email that says, yes, you're fine, and here's your unique code, look out for the link coming later, and you have, as we said there, caveats, or the email outlines some risks, you do need to take those into account. So, for example, the risk might be that from your expression of interest, there's a risk that you might not raise the match capital. So when you make your full application, you need to be very, very clear that you think you will raise the match capital, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is what the money will look like. Or it may say, you've made your application, your EOI, but you're not currently incorporated. Now, the prospectus makes it very clear that anyone applying for the making a full application needs to be incorporated. So, you know, that's a clear action that group would need to take before they make their full application. We've already said that the next round, we believe, the next window will open late March, and we've said there to close probably early May or sometime in May. And as we've said, if you're successful at the EOI stage, you immediately get an outcome letter. If you're successful, it will have a unique code, and you will get an email with a link 2 weeks before that window opens. So just some tips really for actually making an application, some sort of practical tips. So first of all, we recommend that you use a central organization email. So, you know, if you can, set up an email in the name of your organization rather than someone's personal email address, just in case that person, you know, they win the national lottery and go and live in Bermuda and you never see them again, or it just means that more people can access any emails that get sent to that address. This one's really important, I think. So on the My Community website, there is a Word version of the current online application form. So we would highly recommend that as soon as you can, you print off or you download a copy of that Word document. Just to give you an idea, there are about 33 questions. There's far more than 33 questions on the online form, but 33 of those questions have a maximum word count of 500. And we would recommend that, you know, you use those questions to really push your case, and you may not put 500 words in, but you should certainly put a full answer in. If you were to use 500 words for all 33 questions, if my maths is good enough, that's 16,500 words you would be writing in your application. So it's not an insignificant piece of work to actually complete the application form and to do a good job with it. So as soon as you can get your head around what the questions are and start to play with your answers, start to populate that in draft form, the better. Yeah, I can't really stress that strongly enough. Now, it may be that the questions change a bit from round 4. We don't know. If they do, then we hope that we'll have a Word version of the revised online application form. And if that is the case, then that will go on the My Community website. But the current version is on there at the moment. Tying in with that, once you've made your online application and submitted it before the window closes, you cannot then edit or resubmit or submit any further information. So that's another reason to make sure that your draft version, your offline draft version, you're happy with before you then kind of cut or copy and paste that into the online version. I worked with a group that submitted. They were very happy with their submission. They got it in well in time, the day before the window closed. But then when they looked back, they realized they'd made an error, which may or may not have been important, but they felt it was important. I think the error was something along the lines of, in their financial forecast, they'd stated, for sake of argument, that their overall gross margin was 25%, but elsewhere in their submission, they stated it was 20%. So there was an inconsistency there. And really, what they wanted to do was go back and change the document so that it was consistent and tallied. But there was no way of them doing that. They couldn't contact DLUC. You're not allowed to do that, and you cannot change anything you've submitted at that point. So it's really making sure you use your time to make sure that once you've pushed that button and submitted, that everything is correct. Now, you can, and this is all about getting ready in advance, there are 5 opportunities to submit documents on the online application form for the full application. Those 5 documents are something to prove what the asset is worth. So that could be, if you're buying the asset, it could be an asset valuation from a RICS surveyor, or it could be, if you are leasing a building and you have to lease it for at least 15 years and ideally 25 years or more, a lease agreement with whoever you're leasing the building from, but some evidence of the value of the property. If the building you are purchasing, or the asset you are purchasing, is in public ownership, you need to submit something that proves that. You have the opportunity to submit a document that shows support from the community. So typically this would be a survey of your community with, that shows strong support. You have the opportunity to submit something that shows the risks to the project. So DLUC are very clear that there will be risks. That they're not so naive as to think that if you're going to buy an asset, there's no risks in doing that. But what they want to see is a very clear, what we might call a risk register, that outlines what all the risks are and what mitigation the group are going to take to make sure that those risks are understood and are being dealt with. And the final document you can submit is your business plan. And that's a really, really important document, because that will include pretty much everything about your project and the way you're going to run the business. And I would suggest that lots of the content of the business plan, it will go into the key responses to the key questions on the online form. So there is a guide that we have to submitting these documents, just so that it's something else that can go wrong. So read the guide beforehand. Bear in mind that the documents can't be more than 10 megabytes in size. So, it's about reducing the size of the images and doing all of that well in advance before you actually complete the online application. So we've said at the bottom there, don't leave it to the last couple of days of the round being open to submit your application. Line up everything you possibly can in advance, because it's a lengthy process. It's all about being prepared. And it's also about avoiding problems later down the line. So being aware of what could trip you up. We've just said that projects cannot be changed after submission. So yes, make sure you get it right the first time. I talked earlier about the revenue grant. You can apply for up to 20% of your total capital ask, or 50,000, whichever is the greater. So make sure that that's included in your application form. Any costs that you incur before the deadline for submitting can't be included as match funding. If you spent it already, it's as far as DLUC are concerned, that's not part of your match funding. So make sure that whatever you include in your application as match funding hasn't been spent, that it's going to be there and available when they announce the winners. This is a really important one. So DLUC may take a legal charge on your asset, whatever asset you are purchasing. Now, the prospectus states that that generally only applies to capital awards of £250,000 or more. But we know, talking to groups that have already been awarded funds, that that doesn't appear to be the case. And it does appear to be the case that by and large, most groups, however large their capital grant has been, have had a legal charge applied by DLUC. So that if you are successful, there will be an agreement that you'll be asked to sign with lots and lots of clauses in. You'll have a meeting with someone from DLUC, but one of those clauses in the agreement is likely to be a legal charge. Now that means for 7 years, the charge will be in place. And if your business fails, then the chances are that the government will kind of have first dibs on getting some or all of their capital grant back. So that's a significant consideration. So you need to think about, if you're a community benefit society, your shareholders, are they going to get their money back if COF take all of their grant back? If you're taking out a loan or you're paying interest, can you afford to do that? It's a significant consideration. COF is also subject to procurement rules. So these are the basic government rules for public bodies for procurement. So without going into too much detail, if you are proposing to spend up to £2,499 on any form of procurement, then you can just make a direct award to a supplier or contractor. If you are spending between £2,500 and £24,999, then you have to obtain 3 written quotes for that work. Anything £25,000 or over has to go to tender. So that can be a real pain. The biggest factor there is the timing. To actually go to tender takes time, takes a fair bit of work. And so in terms of planning a project and the timescales involved, that's a significant consideration. But if you don't follow those procurement procedures, then COF may say, well, sorry, you're not having the money. So it's important to know that. And just two other points. Just make sure that you know whether your organisation has been subject or is subject to any legal action, because that could disqualify you from obtaining the funds. And check if any of your directors have been disqualified. So anyone that you state as being a director of the organisation or part of the management committee, if they've been disqualified at any time, that could cause you problems further down the line, which you'd want to avoid. Okay, so it sounds all very much doom and gloom so far, doesn't it? All things that or the work you've got to do and all the things you've got to avoid doing. The good news is that DLUC and COF and a locality have provided lots of help and assistance to enable you to make a really strong application. As I say, this was introduced in round 3, and I think it's been a bit of a game changer in terms of groups being able to be prepared if they put the time and effort into it, because there is a very strong assessment criteria which all of you and anyone making a fund application can access via DLUC's website. So I've mentioned this prospectus. So again, there's a link on here to the prospectus in another slide. But it's really important that groups read the prospectus. It's very clear, and it takes you through everything from who's eligible to apply to how funds will be drawn down, what has to be monitored once funds are awarded, etc., etc. So, I mean, just one example. Another group I've worked with recently, through the in-depth support that they were awarded, having passed the EIO, it transpired that they previously made two applications. I think something I failed to mention previously is that something else that changed in round 3 is that groups can make any number of resubmissions. We know that potentially there may only be 2 more windows, there may only be 1 more window, but if you fail in this next window, you can reapply in the next. There's nothing to stop you doing that. So this particular group had applied twice and had failed twice to get COF funding. And when I did their what's called a diagnostic session to understand what support they'd need and where their potential opportunities for support were, it transpired that they were a charitable organisation, but they weren't incorporated. Now, we know that to make the full application, the group has to be incorporated, but they hadn't read in the prospectus that this was the case. And to be fair to them, their outcome letters to tell them they hadn't been successful didn't mention that they hadn't been successful because they weren't incorporated, but they weren't. So we now know that they need to be incorporated before they make their next application in the next window. So yes, read the prospectus on the government website. It won't take you that long. But also then look at this assessment criteria and scoring matrix. I'm going to kind of talk you through that now. But yeah, please, if you're serious about applying to COF, read this criteria and read the scoring matrix, because it really will help you frame your answers on the online question and what goes into your business plan document. Now, we're told so far that all the groups that have failed, now it's fair to say that DLUC aren't brilliant at communicating. They're not brilliant at communicating with locality or with Plunkett or with groups that apply. But we think that probably something like 1 in 3 applicants for the full COF grant scheme have been successful. So 1 in 3 have been successful so far, roughly. Again, I'm looking at Diane and George. A bit of a nod, maybe. We don't know.
That's roughly right.
Yeah, roughly 1 in 3. And we're also told that the 2/3 that have failed because they haven't scored highly enough against the assessment criteria and the scoring matrix. So they've fallen down somewhere. Now, it's quite possible that in the next round, we think, because the government are encouraging groups to apply now, because it's coming towards the end of the scheme, because there's only 1 more round, that there will be more groups applying. And that possibly means that more groups will tick all the boxes in terms of the assessment criteria and the scoring matrix. And if there are too many that apply, and the government have to make decisions over who's going to get the money, then it's meant to be down to Michael Gove to make that decision. And he will base his decisions, if everyone ticks all the boxes on the assessment criteria, he will base his decisions on 5 factors. And those factors are the balance and spread of locations. So if there's loads of applicants that tick all the boxes in Wiltshire, he'll say, well, I only want 5 from Wiltshire, so we're going to go with these 5. The balance of rural and urban locations. So they want a reasonable split across urban and rural. What's called a thematic split of asset types. So he doesn't want 1 round with 30 pubs. He may only want 5 pubs in the next round. Or he may say, we've had, 3 big theatres in the last round, we don't want another 3 in this round, or there's too many swimming pools, or whatever it may be. So that's another consideration. A balance of organisational types. So, are you a charity? Are you a parish council? Are you a KIP? He wants a balanced spread across all of those different types of organisations. And the 5th one is a balance of projects requiring large and small amounts of funding. So he won't want 6 groups being awarded £2 million and nothing else, or 300 groups being awarded 20,000. He'll want a range with some being awarded small amounts and some being awarded large amounts. So that's something else to bear in mind. That's nothing that any of us really can do anything about, but we need to be aware of that. Okay, so I'm going to go into a bit more detail about this assessment criteria and the weightings involved. I'll say all of this is available on the government website, the DLUC website. But just in very broad terms, the criteria and weighting are split into two sections, and the online application form is also split into these two sections. So the first sort of third of the form is really a general information about your organisation and about the asset and your community, and then the questions are around the strategic case and then around the management case. So if you look at the table there, the left-hand side is about the strategic case. So I think of this as being about the why and the who. So why is this asset at risk, and why do we want to buy it or take it for the community, and who is the community that we're talking about? So you can see that there are 4 elements of the strategic case, and I will go into a bit more detail about each of these in a moment. The first one is community use. The second one is benefits. The third one is engagement. And the fourth one is environmental sustainability. So the benefits and the engagement are double weighted. So where I put ×2, that means that whatever you score on there is double weighted. So the government deems those two as being more important than the other factors in the strategic case. Environmental sustainability is weighted at 0.6, so they think that's less important. There we are. And then on the management case, 4 elements there are the funding breakdown, the financial risks and forecasts, and that also is double weighted, so that's really, really important. Skills and resources, and then lastly, what's called representation, inclusion, and integration. So the two sides are roughly the same. There's 15. There's a weight of 15 for the strategic case and a weight of 16. Sorry, no, 16 for the strategic case and 15 for the management case. So they're very broadly worth about the same amount. You also have to score a minimum of 12 across the top 3 sections in the management case. Now, it's fair to point out that in our experience, we've said that DLUC aren't very good at providing feedback to anyone. But from the outcome letters that we've seen going to groups that have failed in previous rounds, the vast majority have failed on the management case. And we think the management case is assessed before the strategic case. And if you fail on the management case, it may be that the strategic case is not even assessed fully. But I think the 2 middle areas, really, the financial risks and forecast and the skills and resources, seem to be the areas where most groups that have failed have failed. Now, we don't know that for absolute certainty because, as I say, the outcome letters tend to be very short. In the first couple of rounds, they were literally, sorry, you haven't been successful, or you have been successful. I think in round 3, there was a bit more nuance in the outcome letters, and groups were told which areas they, in terms of the scoring criteria, they failed on. And so the management cases, so I've said the strategic case is about why and who. For me, the management case is about how and what. So, okay, how are you going to do this? How are you going to buy the asset? How are you going to run it as a community-owned business? And what will that business look like going forward once you've secured the asset for the community? So I'm just going to go through a bit more about the strategic case and the management case. So this is where it gets a bit more detailed, but this hopefully will kind of give you an idea of the level of detail required to complete the application form and your business plan document. So with a strategic case, the sort of questions that you're asked are around who uses the asset currently, or who's it been used for in the past, and why is it important? Why is the asset at risk of loss? Is it for sale? Is it, I talked about the risks of loss earlier. Is it risk of dereliction? Is it just a failing commercial business? Why is it important that the community intervenes? Is it potentially, is it going to get change of use and just be converted into housing, and the asset will then go? And why would it be better in community hands? Why would the community do a better job than a private individual? And then in terms of engagement and local support, so how is the community being consulted and shape plans for the asset? So what DLUC want to see is there is broad community involvement, consultation, engagement. And it's not just a group of individuals who think, oh, this will be a good idea, we'll do this. I tend to think that you certainly need a full community survey. And in my view, you kind of want at least 50% of your households in your community, depending on where you are and what type of community you are, but particularly if you're a rural community, 50% of households to have completed a survey. And then you really want everyone, or a vast majority of people that complete the survey, to say that it's really important this asset remains. It's really important that it's kept in community hands. You can ask people, would they contribute financially, buying community shares, making donations? Would they volunteer to help, either in the sort of project stage or once it's up and running? And how else can you demonstrate local support? So have you met with other local community groups and discussed how they would use the asset? Have you looked at your local plan, for instance, and what does that say about this asset and the general aspirations for the local area? Can you give details of local support? So, have you spoken to your local MP? Have you spoken to the local parish council or town council? And how can you demonstrate their support for the project? And the last two on the strategic case. So remembering that benefits here is double weighted. So what community benefits will this project deliver? How will planned activities deliver these benefits? How will you deliver and sustain benefits over time? And how will the whole community benefit? So this is very much about understanding who your community are, and that your asset is going to help the whole cross-section of people that live near that asset and form that community. So this is very much about what are your desired outcomes from the project. So, if it's a shop and a post office, is it about reducing social isolation? Is it about helping the 10 or 15% of your community that don't have access to public transport or own a car, giving them the opportunity to be able to buy food and use post office services? And how are you going to measure those outcomes once you've bought this asset and it's being run by the community? Have you got a social impact matrix? Can you demonstrate a theory of change? It's all these sort of things that demonstrate that if you're successful, then you will benefit the community as a whole. And then finally, environmental sustainability. So, if it's a new build, are you taking into account environmental sustainability in everything you do in that build? If you're taking on board an existing asset, can you improve it to improve its environmental sustainability? There's a new grant scheme, or newish grant scheme, available for social enterprises, and pretty much anyone applying for COF, I think, would tick the boxes for this scheme. It's run by VCSE, and it's the Energy Efficiency Scheme. Diane, I know you know about this. I don't know if you can pop the link in the chat. That would be brilliant. but you can apply for grants to have an independent energy efficiency survey, which would tell you, where the asset can make energy efficiency savings. It can also, once you've had the report, the survey, that you could then apply for a capital grant to implement any of the recommendations on the survey. So that's a useful tool. So that's the strategic case. So the management case. So that, as I said to you, this is about the how and the what. So a lot of this centers around the financial forecast and the financial sustainability of this, your project or the asset you wish to purchase. So what the government don't want to do is back projects that are just don't stack up financially, or will fail in the first 2 or 3 years. They want to see that this is a sustainable business and a community business. So again, there are 4 areas here. So the first one is a funding breakdown. So you need to do, before you make your application, you need to do a fair bit of work to understand what the asset is worth. So, is it a valuation survey? Have you agreed in principle to buy an asset? Can you have a heads of terms signed that you can submit? And then if it's a significant refurbishment or renovation, then you really need to break down all of those costs. It's also true of revenue funding. So, what revenue? What is your revenue budget? How much of that are you applying for from COF? And the match funding is really important. So we've seen in quite a few expression of interest outcome emails recently that the match funding has been identified as a risk. So that 20% or more match funding, where is that going to come from? How confident are you're going to raise those funds? You may have them in the bank already, which is brilliant, but you may not. But you really need to demonstrate to DLUC that you are confident of achieving that 20% match funding. And the government are very keen that we don't expect you or your team, your group, to have all of the skills necessary. So have you taken professional advice? So we talked about a survey. There's all sorts of professional legal advice that you could achieve, or you could take on board, but you need to prove that you've done that to show that you have a strong case. And then in terms of the financial risks and forecasts, so this is all about having a very strong financial forecast model. We've said here a 3-year, certainly I would say a 5-year profit and loss forecast, a 5-year cash flow forecast. COF don't require a balance sheet, but I would recommend that you should include that as well. And then a risk register. So we've said that there is an opportunity to submit separately a risk register, but you really need to highlight what all those risks are and how you're going to mitigate all of those risks from your project. And yeah, don't downplay the risks. There will be risks in any project. There will be risks, and the government want to see that. And I think my sense is that some groups have underplayed the risks and have just said, no, this is all fine. This will be, it's not too risky. Whereas there clearly are all sorts of risks. Those risks might, let's say you're buying a pub. The risks are that it's a tenanted model and that you can't take on a decent tenant, or they leave after the first 6 months. That with good underlying assumptions, you say that your income is going to be this much and your gross margin is going to be this much, but there's a risk in the first few years that you don't achieve those numbers. So what will you do? How can you cope with that? How can you demonstrate that this is a sustainable business and you can deal with those challenges? So that's really important. So that's the management case, and the final two in the management case, and skills and resources. If I'm just checking, I think this one is also double. No, this isn't double weighted. So it's just the previous one, the risks, financial risks and forecasts is double weighted. But skills and resources isn't. But this has been flagged up with quite a few outcome letters for groups that have failed in the last round. It's all about demonstrating that you have the skills and resources in place, not only to see this project through to purchasing an asset and renovating an asset, but also running it as a business ongoing and as a sustainable business for many, many years. So it's about your governance structure. So, you know, what is your governance structure, and why does that structure mean that it will be that you'll be a successful business? A membership structure, you know, how are you involving people throughout the community? What previous experience is there of managing similar projects in your community from people that are involved? There's a requirement to sort of outline the roles and responsibilities of board members, and then having policies and procedures and systems in place. So if you haven't got them in place, how can you prove to or demonstrate to COF that they will be in place? It's also about having a succession plan. So you may have a great group of people now, but let's say, you know, once you've bought the shop, that everyone says that we've done it now, we're walking away. What's your succession plan? How will you get new people on board? You know, as I say, the person that's going to run your shop leaves after 6 months. What succession plans do you have in place? How are you going to recruit a team of people? And why is that going to be an effective way of recruiting? So that's a really, really important section. And then finally, on the management case, representation, inclusion, and integration. So once the asset is up and running, how are you going to make sure that everyone is involved, everyone can be part of that asset? So again, it's about, is there a membership scheme? Is there any obstacles to people using that asset? And how are you going to be accountable to the whole of the community and not just a niche group of people? So I don't expect you to read this. I'm not going to read it out, but if you do access the assessment criteria on the DLUC website, this is what you'll see. So it tells you, this is just an example for benefits. Remember, this is one of the double weighted areas. It will tell you what you'd expect to have on your application form to be satisfactory, good, or excellent. And what I'd advise all groups to do is look on the right-hand side of the screen there, excellent. So what does excellent look like in terms of benefits? So read that and say, well, actually, does our application form, does our business plan look like we're going to deliver all those bullet points that where it says excellent? If not, then you've got more work to do. Yeah, you need to readdress your business plan. You need to readdress your draft. You know, I said there's a word version of the application form. Readdress what's in that draft application to make sure you can tick off all of those bullet points. Yeah, and it's the same. This is just the one for benefits, but there's a table like this for all of the 8 areas within the strategic case and within the management case. So we have just a few last sort of top tips, just to kind of summarize, you know, some practical tips for what you should and shouldn't do. So the first one is just a reminder about revenue funding. So as well as this capital funding, we've already said you can apply for capital funds of up to £2 million, as long as you can match that with 20% of your own funding. But don't forget, you can apply for revenue funding of 20% or 50,000, whichever is the greater. That's of your capital ask. Yeah, the government are really keen to give you this money. I certainly sense that, as long as you can prove where you're going to spend it. So within your application form, within your business plan, you will need a breakdown saying, okay, we're going for 50,000 and it's going to be spent like this. So we want 25,000 to pay for the first 6 months of the manager's wages. We want 10,000 to pay for a project manager for the first 3 months, and so on. Yeah, follow the assessment guidance. I know I've bored you probably for the last 20 minutes talking to you about those assessment criteria, but please just read them and make sure that you address every point on there, because yeah, you want to tick those boxes. So we said that there's an opportunity to attach 5 documents. Make sure that those documents tie up with what you've said in your online application form. So, you know, if your business plan says that you're going to take £250,000 in turnover in the first year, make sure that your application form says the same thing. Yeah, make sure that those things align. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's so important. Start writing your draft application as soon as you possibly can. Yeah, so you'll be writing a business plan document, but in conjunction with that, start to look at that draft application form. Even if you're not happy with what you've written there, it's a starting point and you're starting to work on it. Don't forget 33 questions with the option to have 500 words in each of those 33 questions, and lots of other questions as well. There's a lot of work needs to go into it. Don't leave it to the last minute to think, oh, yeah, we need to fill this in. So refer to evidence. So we haven't really talked about this, but in terms of the management case, in terms of your financial forecasts, this really needs to be underpinned with your experience of reality. So you're going to be making assumptions on things like your income, things like all of your costs and your margins. So what are you basing those on? So have you looked at similar businesses in other parts of the country, or maybe there's somewhere near you that you can model it on? Have you looked at information that's come from organisations like Plunkett UK or professional bodies that work with your type of asset? And what other research have you got that underpins those assumptions? Because COF want to see that whatever you're saying you're going to deliver is realistic and is based on reality. That's really important. And that ties in with the next point, which means explaining your reasoning and be consistent. Yeah, so if you're having a business plan with that we talked about, those forecasts, the P&L forecast, the cash flow forecast, make sure that there's a really strong narrative around that explains why those numbers are as they are, and make sure that whatever you put in your business plan and whatever you put in your application form is consistent and they match each other. We've said just assume that your assessor knows nothing about your organisation. So you've got plenty of opportunity in the form to explain what your organisation is all about. Use those words, use that space, to provide explanations and to paint a picture. So we said, does your application make sense to a fresh pair of eyes? So you're bound, if you're involved in this, you're bound to get sort of bogged down in the detail. You've got to provide lots of time and effort into putting together a strong application. And we must stress that this is not something to be taken lightly. It's a big undertaking to deliver a really strong application, but it's possible. So you will need a team of people to do it. So this is not something that one person can do on their own. I would say it's not something that 2 or 3 people can do on their own. And I think my understanding and my learning is that the groups that are successful have a team of people, maybe of 8 to 10 people, that feed into this and provide real help and time and do the kind of the dirty work of putting together a strong business plan and a strong application. But often you're involved in the detail, the minutiae. Try and find someone who can sort of read it as a fresh pair of eyes. Yeah, so that sees it, that hasn't been involved in the day-to-day putting together a view of the application, that can read through it and just say, yeah, that's really good, or actually these bits don't quite make sense, or they're not quite consistent. So that's really important as part of that process. So leave time to do that. So we've said that you don't get much feedback. We've said that once you've submitted your application, that's it. You can't change anything. There can be no dialogue with DLUC at that point. Once you've passed the EOI stage and before you make your full application, you can have, we think, the maximum of 30 minutes of time with someone from the department, if you can get hold of them, to ask questions. So make sure that you use that time if you need it. And finally, there is all sorts of other information available. The My Community website has got lots of content, lots of material on there, including several other webinars that will help you. So make sure you use that information. Read what you can. As I say, read the prospectus and please read the criteria, the scoring criteria. Yeah, this webinar is being recorded, so this will be available. So if you've got members of your team that are not here today that want to watch it, that this recording will be available. The links that are on this pack will be available. We'll share that with you. It will come through Locality rather than Plunket UK, but it will be made available to you.
Okay, so it's just a little bit of a reminder to go to the My Community site. There's a lot of help on there, actually. The frequently asked questions is huge and really detailed. So that would be my first point of call if I had a question, is just to look through what's already there. Because an awful lot of organisations have asked questions at this point, hundreds of them. So have a look on that if you've got more questions. There are specific other webinars coming up from the other coalition support partners, and these might be about different types of asset, and it might be geographical as well. We've got partners in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Plunket covers all of the above. Yeah, there's templates there for cash flow forecasts and risk registers, and I think other things as well. So have a look through what's there. And there's a lot of top tips about how to do particular things. So there's a lot of stuff to draw on. I think it's really just a case of actually looking at it all and trying to condense it down a bit, really. As we've said, the application form is available, a draft of it in Word format, so you can save it to your computer and you can start typing into it so that later on you can just cut and paste, which we definitely recommend you do. There's also some case studies of successful COF grantees on the My Community website as well. And of course, the enquiry form, the online form that you can fill out. So if you've got any questions that you can't see the answers to, that's the place to go. Fill it out, put it in, and it gets triaged out across that coalition of organisations to respond to. So you might get Plunket, you might get somebody else. I just want to say thank you very much at this point. We're going to draw it to a close. So thank you to Carol for giving us such a great run through of your experience of going through the COF and of your project generally. I thought it was really interesting. And congratulations again on Open and Trading Pub. Fantastic news. Thank you very much, David, for all your presentation and the detail and the experience as ever. Fantastic. As we said, the slides and a feedback form will be going out to everybody from Locality in the next few days, so look out for that. But in the meantime, good luck with your applications, good luck with your projects, and we hope to see you again on a webinar very soon, either at Plunket or through the COF. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.